everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bakersfield Redux. I'm so excited today to be able to talk with Jim Shaw, a former Buckaroo who was instrumental in Buck's later years and in the creation and management of the Crystal Palace. Jim has so much wisdom to share with us today about what it was like to be a Buckaroo, to work with Buck Owens, Don Rich, Doyle Hawley, and even more. I'm super excited for us to be able to dive into this chapter of Bakersfield history together. All right, Mr. Shaw, I'd like to start this morning just by thanking you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to get to talk to you about some of these questions that the fans sent about your musical career and your time with the Buckaroos. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, definitely.
So let's just start. I know that you talk about this on interviews all the time, and for the fans watching, I will link some of these interviews below, but let's start with just a little synopsis. How did your music career begin, and how did you come to be a part of the Buckaroos?
I was working about 2 hours to the north of Bakersfield. I lived in Fresno, had a band there, and was doing well at the age of 23. Had my own band, country band, in a club called the Nashville West, and a Saturday TV show. And I thought when I heard about this new recording studio down in Bakersfield that Buck Owens had, maybe I could go down there and use that recording studio, record my own band's album, and we could sell it on the TV show. And so I just popped down there one day, and I drove with Doyle, who had been in the Buckaroos about 8 months and was a friend of mine. So we went down, and he went in to do a recording session with Buck, and I was just going to go out in the front and get brochures, get my questions answered, how much it's going to cost per hour, etc. And so I happened to be there at a time when, out in the recording studio, the piano player that Buck had hired, who happened to be David Frizzell, couldn't play the song. It was a complicated song they were recording, and he couldn't get through it without making mistakes. Buck found out that there was a piano player out front, me, and came and got me, and I finished the session, and he asked if I could do any more sessions in the future, and I said absolutely. So that was the early 1970. I started going back and forth from Fresno to Bakersfield, 2-hour drive, 3-4 times a week sometimes. Wow. And doing all of Buck's sessions. And we got along really well, and he hired me as a Buckaroo on June 1st, 1970.
That's awesome. I've played the piano for 15 years, so I can appreciate, complicated pieces, and that's an amazing story. I know I heard a little bit about that on other interviews with you that I watched, but what was it like recording with Buck? What was he like in the studio? What were the Buckaroos like in the studio?
Well, Buck's things were usually not really extensive, complicated arrangements. Right. Buck liked to play things simple. I remember flashing forward when we were doing Bridge Over Troubled Waters, the song. I got all excited because I knew how all those diminished chords and stuff, and I thought, I'll make it real gospel. And Buck says, no, take all those chords out and just keep it straight, because I want people, just people in any town to be able to sit down and play this song. I want to simplify it. I want to make it more basic. That was kind of the way he liked to do things. So his sessions were generally, he tried to make things sound unique, come up with a little gimmick or a hook or something like that, but generally not too complicated. Sometimes what made him tricky is the keys. Buck wanted to play a song in the perfect key for his voice, and if it happened to be A flat or C sharp, something ugly to a piano player, he didn't care. I had to play it in those keys. That was before we had keyboards that had a button that said transpose.
Right.
I had a regular piano, and I had to play it in the key he was doing it. So that made it tricky sometimes. Like the first day, like I said, that first song was a little song that modulated from, I think, F to G flat at the end, and that's what threw the other piano player off every time. He just got lost.
Oh man. No, growing up, my nanny taught me how to play the piano a little bit, and then I started taking lessons. But some of her favorite, she played the mandolin too, and some of her favorite keys were those keys with a lot of flats, like the G flat, the A flat, the D flat. So now I just love those keys so much, and everybody's like, "You are insane!" But it does really take a talented musician to be able to do that. And I know you mentioned some of the different instruments that you played. Let's talk a little bit about that. Someone had asked what kind of organs and keyboards you played in the beginning. Do you remember anything about that?
Well, it was awful. I mean, in the 70s, they hadn't come up with samplers and the technology that later on uh, gave you a portable keyboard with a wonderful real piano sound
Right.
and or even a good action to it. And all that was available was just it was horrible. You could get a Wurlitzer electric piano. You could get these little portable organs for just a short period of time. We had one made by Baldwin. Oh, awful. And then Farfisa had one. All I wanted was something that was enough percussive that it did the job of a piano. I could play the rhythm section and do these things, but it didn't sound like a piano. And I didn't like it when we played in a big enough place or Vegas or a sit down job or something like that. We would always get a real piano there. But on the one night stands, we had these miserable little keyboards that I never liked them and was so excited later on when we got ones that did a nice job.
Yes, I want to go back to what you said with all the diminished chords and that gospel sound that was on like that original recording of Bridge Over Troubled Water. That was definitely not Buck's brand, as you said. And I feel like from my experience of listening to his music, that he created a lot of relatability and a lot of rapport with his fans by keeping things really simple and things that they could really relate to. How else did Buck do that and create that rapport and that mutual respect with his fans? What was it like when you worked with him to see him interact with his fans?
Well, uh, all those things happen, of course, in the recording studio, and it's something that we were very used to. Somebody would say, "Hey, what if we did this?" And Buck says, "No, no." He says, "I know that chord, but I don't want to play it." And it was like, don't play over the listeners' heads. And I don't think he meant that as any kind of a negative that,
Right.
everybody out there, they don't have any talent and they can't do that. But he really wanted to have a lot of hook in the song. And so that you could hear that song once or twice and get it stuck in your head and sing along very quickly, very quickly. I
Mhm.
mean, listen to "I've got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see." I mean, how could it be any more straight ahead than that?
Yes. And those Buck songs get stuck in your head so easily. I know some days I'll just be walking around and suddenly like Gonna Have Love. Even some of the lesser known ones, they're just
Mhm.
so catchy with that sound that they just get lodged up there in your brain. Um, the band probably had a lot to do with that too. That
Yeah,
sound.
those were called head arrangements in
Right.
that in that it happened in the studio. Buck
Mhm.
comes in, he's got his guitar. Here's a new song we're going to do. And then we just all start brainstorming and noodling around. And Don Rich might just play a line or something like that. And Buck says, "Yeah, do that two times at the beginning, and then we'll make that into the instrumental." Or maybe Don and I would do. I remember when we did Made in Japan. I had a little Farfisa organ, and I did these little Oriental Asian kind of sounding little licks, and we worked it out and against the fiddle, and that happened quickly.
Mhm.
And generally, when things happen quickly, that means it's not going to be too complicated.
Mhm.
Buck liked to work fast, and yeah, we worked them out in the studio, and so then when the record came out, and it might come out 3, 4, 5 months later, that as long as that, and the next thing you know, we've got to play that on the road, and it occurs to us that we almost don't even remember because we played it that day and we haven't heard it since.
Yes.
And so, whoops, okay, oh yeah, I remember that song. Now we got to do that song, and so we had to learn it in a sense, and we didn't really rehearse. We just had a copy of it. We listened to it. We knew what to do.
Mhm. That does take a great deal of talent. And I think that, you just said this, but I'm going to emphasize it again that a lot of the stuff that happened in the studio was not planned. That was just off the cuff, just talent, just knowing that sound. And you
Well,
mentioned
sometimes I'd call that a happy accident.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, sometimes, playing things and like, hearing chords and songs and stuff, I'm just like, oh, I wonder if they did that on purpose or if it just kind of happened. So it's a good insight for the fans to be able to see a little bit about, what was going on. Also, you mentioned to me a little bit beforehand that you had some stories about Don Rich, what it was like to be in the studio with him and work with him. I think this will be perfect opportunity to share some of those.
Well, I really love the piece you did with the two boys, Vic and Vance. I always admired those two guys. They are such a testimony to the way they were raised by Don and Marlene,
Mhm.
and they're just two good guys. And I remember going over to Don's house. He had a house over not too long far from where the two Doyles live, Doyle Kurtzinger and Doyle Holly,
Right.
all in the same area. And Don's house had he called it a music room, but it was a den, but he had some big posters in there, and that's where he listened to music and played his guitars. And we spent a lot of happy times there. He introduced me to he loved other kinds of music than country. He just loved music. And that's where we learned. He showed me Harlan Howard and the quartet, and we'd sit there and work on things. And I remember we worked up a version of Classical Gas, just he and I. And I think I sent you a picture of he and I in the studio working on that one of the early days, just having a good time. And it was so fun to be at his house. And sadly, a lot of things that happened at his house had to do with the motorcycles, because he and I love motorcycles.
Right.
And that's something that it always comes back to the 1974 motorcycle crash. And it's just something Don and I were kids, we're very young. We just wanted to have some fun and ride our motorcycles and play music. But he was my hero. I admired him so much. When he died, that was the first huge devastation in my life, my first loss. And it did the same thing, of course, to Buck and everybody in the band and everybody in the organization. And it was heartbreaking for all of us to continue on. And but Don, well, you remember that with the Buckaroos, we released a couple songs by the band, The Wait and The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. He just loved to do stuff like that. And I remember one time we, in the studio, after a session, we worked up Will It Go Round in Circles, which is a song by, I'm blanking on his name, the fifth Beatle, the keyboard player.
Oh, the one who sings Nothing from Nothing. Billy Preston?
Billy Preston. Thank you so much. Billy Preston's Will It Go Round in Circles. And we worked that up, and it was fun to play. And we were playing some dates with Loretta Lynn. That's a timely thing. She just passed away. Loretta Lynn and her band, the Coal Miners. And I remember we were at a racetrack in Detroit, out down below the grandstand there. And the Buckaroos would open the show. We'd do 3 or 4 songs. And then Susan Ray would come on, and Buddy, and then Buck. And so we were doing our little set, and we did a couple things, Buckaroo, and a couple things we normally do. And all of a sudden Don says, "Hey, let's do Well Around in Circles." And he tells Jerry, "Count it off." And we're all looking at him. Are you nuts? Are you kidding? And not country. And I remember Loretta Lynn's band was sitting down on the bleachers in the first row watching us, because they'd already played. They opened the show. And we kicked that off, and we're playing that song, "Will It Go Round in Circles?" Did it? And the Loretta's band's going, "What are they doing?" And the next thing I hear Buck off to the side, "Don Rich, you son of a," and Buck was so mad. And Don just had that great big beautiful smile on his face. And shucks, Chief. He told me, I just had a wild hair there. You couldn't be mad at him. And yeah, he was crazy. We loved him.
Yeah. I've always heard growing up, the more you learn about the celebrities you look up to, the more disappointed you will be in them. Well, I have found that to not be the case with Don, getting to talk to you, getting to talk to his sons about the kind of person he was. I really do think that what Vic and Vance said in the last episode about the person you see in the videos, the person you see goofing off on stage was really him. I think that just rings true
Well,
the more I talk.
there's a couple entertained actors that are like that. You look at him and you just say, what a neat person, what a neat front, and it's a smile. One was Dan Blocker,
Mm-hmm.
Haas. The other was who was the guy that the shipwreck, that show, and the captain, and
Alan Hale, Gilligan's Island. Was that it?
Gilligan's Island, Alan, yeah, the captain. He just had that big smile, and you just knew he was a good guy. And I always thought Don was just like that. You just knew he was a good guy. One of Buck's favorite stories talking about Don was this incident that happened where Don Rich got a call in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning. Somebody, hey Don, my car's broken down and I'm stuck on the side of the road. And could you come and get me and help me? And I don't know what it is. I'm going to help him. Don is out of bed. He's pulling his pants on, putting his shoes on. Yeah. Okay. Well, about where are you? Where are you? Okay. Okay. I know where that is. I'll be there. I'm probably can be there in about 20 minutes. And then he says, and by the way, who is this? And Buck said, that's who Don Rich was.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. I read that story in an interview with Doyle Hawley as well. And that just, again, just goes to show, what kind of a person he was. And I feel like that probably made it easier and more fun to be a part of a band and be a part of a career that was just so hard, like being on the road all the time. Am I right in that assumption?
Oh yeah, Don Rich canceled out Doyle Hawley. Doyle Hawley was a mean. He in my early days he was kind of rough on me, and teasing me and everything. And one time Don felt bad about that. He saw that going on, and he came over and he says, the next time he starts in on you, he's real sensitive about his short legs. And I said, he is? He said, yeah. So Doyle starts giving me a hard time about something. And I said, yeah, at least I don't have short little legs. And he just never bothered me again. Never bothered me again.
I think that those two, like Don and Doyle, and you hear it in like the Carnegie Hall album, the like Live at the White House album, those personalities were so different, but they were both so bold that they worked so well together. And I know that maybe that was a little bit difficult behind the scenes, but I mean, for fans listening to it, it is absolute gold. Like their horse impressions in the Carnegie Hall album, they just went together like bread and butter. People say Buck and Don went together well. Don and Doyle, there's personalities just meshed in such a way that I have never seen anything else like. So I completely understand where that comes from. And that is so funny that he was, sensitive about that. Good for you for sticking up for yourself, though. Proud of you for that.
Well, yeah, at the beginning, they called me Jim Shy instead of Jim Shaw. Right. And it was a little overwhelming, but I got over it. And it was a lot of fun. There was no negatives there. It was a lot of fun. The biggest challenge would have been Buck himself, who was a type A hard driving personality and could be difficult to work for in that he wanted perfection. He could not stand the word assume. You ever used assume in the sentence, you're going to get it. But he brought out the best in you. Yes. He brought out the best in you. And if he ever got all over you for something and there was something unfair about it, he always came back and apologized. Right. Always. Yeah. I mean, I admired him. He was a huge part of my life. And I feel privileged that towards the last decades that I became closer to him and became a friend, and he was just a totally unique guy, just one of a kind.
Let's talk about you and Buck. This is a perfect transition outside of the context of the Buckaroos, things like the Crystal Palace. How did that develop? Were you around for that? Was that all Buck's idea? Well, how did you become involved?
In our travels, Buck had always said, someday I'd like to have my own place where we don't have to travel anymore. Let people come to us instead of us traveling to them. And so it was on our mind. So when we play our favorite places, we were always commenting on them, ideas we could steal, whether it's a Hard Rock Cafe, whether it's the Crazy Horse, whether it's Knott's Berry Farm, those kinds of places that lent themselves to the Western thing. And so it was on our mind for many years. There was a few false starts. He had plans drawn up and turned out not to be what he wanted, and put it aside for a while. And it wasn't until about 1993 that we got really serious and started putting up the ideas. And I remember one time Buck said to me, I want something when they walk in the door, it just knocks them over, something really wild and crazy. And so I feel I came up with the very first idea, and that was, we called it the Buckmobile, the car with the cow horns and all that we bought from Nudie. I said, let's hang it on the wall behind the bar. And he says, awesome. I love it. We'll do it. And so we just started, trying to come up with a combination of all the ideas. And, nobody had ever done it before. If you went to the Hard Rock Cafe or the Crazy Horse, they had a restaurant, but then you went into another room where the music was playing, the concert hall.
Right.
Or they're over here where the museum is. We wanted it all in one place where you had the museum, the food, the venue, all in one room. And so we didn't have anybody, to steal their ideas on that. We had to come up with how to do that. And so we had a lot of planning, started construction in '94, figured it would take a year. And because Buck could not look at a plan or a drawing or an elevation and know, he just couldn't work that way. He had to see the real thing. So we would build something and he'd say, oh yeah, that's perfect, but it should have been bigger and it should have been over there. So we'd tear it down. So we had 130 some change orders. And instead of 1 year, it took 2 years because of Buck helping. And instead of spending $3.5 million, we spent close to $7 million because Buck didn't care. He wanted it the way his vision was. And so he didn't make it easy, but we got a really spectacular place when we were done.
Oh, yes. In the end, that makes it so much more of a genuine experience for the people who go there. And just to be able to see Buck's vision exactly as he intended for it to be, as this shrine to, to music and to, just the underlying, ideas in country music are just being together and just enjoying that. So I have not made it out to California yet in my life.
Have you taken the virtual tour at buckowens.com?
Oh, I have looked on the website, but I have not seen it.
Somewhere up in the corners, just take a virtual tour, and it'll take you all through the palace.
Wow, I'm going to have to do that. And I'm going to link that as well for the fans. If anyone else wants to do the virtual tour, I will be definitely taking advantage of that. Tell me a little bit, what can a fan expect today with the Crystal Palace? How are things going there? What's your capacity now?
Oh, well, we're just trying to get back, and everybody's heard, nationwide about the staffing problems, and we're not immune to that. And in the old days, we had up to 32 servers. It's a big place.
Yes.
It holds close to 600 people. We've had everybody there from the Dixie Chicks to Taylor Swift to Garth Brooks.
Right.
And it's an amazing venue. But after the COVID, we spread everything out, pulled a lot of tables and chairs. We're probably down to, I don't know, maybe 500, more like 440 people now. And we're not trying to cram as many people in there, but we can't get enough servers and runners and hostesses, and we hire them, and then they work 3 or 4 days or weeks and don't show up, and it's so frustrating. I love the ones that do, and we're trying to get there, but the Buckaroos haven't come back. We're not sure. Doyle is 85 years old, and he's had a heart attack and lost his hearing, and he's struggling, but still doing well. Terry Christopherson, our guitar player, he'd be about 78 now, and he's had some health issues, heart bypass and stuff. And so bunch of old guys, all of us in the band over 50 years. And we're not sure what we'll do.
Right. Well, no matter what y'all do, I know you've definitely left your mark on the music industry, and I am just so grateful that I get to be able to talk to someone who was right there in the middle of all of it. So thank you once again so much for just chatting with me today about all of this. And, we're running out of time on our little 40-minute Zoom meeting, but I just want to thank you once again and tell everyone watching. This has been an interview with Jim Shaw, who is a former Buckaroo and who is highly involved with the Crystal Palace and with Buck Owens. So once again, I am just honored that we were able to have you on the series. And thank you so much for just opening up with me today and taking the time to share some of those stories of your memories in the band and your memories of Don Rich. So
It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining me for another episode of Bakersfield Redux. Today, we had the honor of hearing from Jim Shaw, a former Buckaroo and someone who has so much knowledge and experience to share about Buck Owens, his band, and the Bakersfield sound in general. We talked about what it was like to work with Buck, what Don was like in the studio, and even some funny stories about live performances and incidents that occurred when he was a part of the band in the early 70s. Once again, just like to extend a thank you to Jim Shaw for joining us today. Thank you everyone for watching. Tune in next time for another episode, and until then, always keep a song in your heart.